body and grinding down the center.
Okay, we'll start with this. Reigning WBA bantamweight champion from right here in the US of A, Jamie Mitchell, took to social media and stated, "Yo, Lou DiBella, Dina Thorslund really thinks I don't want to fight her. Laughing, I'll smoke her too, and I want to fight Yuli Hangaluna." Lee Eaton, Dina Thorslund's handler. Unbeaten two-division champion Dina Thorslund of Denmark. Her handler, Lee Eaton, stated, "Team Thorslund agreed terms to fight you on November 12th show. We was ready to go." There seems to be a miscommunication here between the teams. Team Thorslund are adamant that they agreed to fight November 12th. Mitchell is bemused, saying she has not been notified. Will contact her management. It's a bona fide case of he said, she said. I don't think Dina Thorslund is at all apprehensive, squarely, at the prospect of facing Jamie Mitchell because she has several advantages over Jamie. She is several years younger than Jamie and more experienced as a professional. Time is very much on Dina's side, and Dina's no champion of opportunity. She's not some girl that all of a sudden won a belt. She's been a champion at two weights. She was WBO champion up there at super bantamweight, moved down in weight, and picked up the WBO title there as well, sporting a professional record of 18 wins, no losses, no draws, with 7 knockouts. Dina Thorslund is the real deal. She's the real thing. She is one of the two more experienced champions at this weight. It's between her and Mexico's own Yuli Hangaluna. She's got 2 times as many victories as a professional over Jamie Mitchell. Jamie Mitchell, who sports a professional record of 8 wins, no losses, 2 draws, with 5 knockouts. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think either fighter is afraid of the other fighter, afraid of the other champion. If there's a miscommunication here, listen, we know that there was supposed to be a plan in play for Jamie Mitchell to take on Shannon Courtenay for a second time. Shannon Courtenay, who's supposed to be returning to action sometime in the fall in a 6-rounder or an 8-rounder, and then they would move straight into the Jamie Mitchell rematch. What the plan was not that long ago. Did it change? Jamie beat Shannon late last year in October. She then returned to action early this year in February against then unbeaten Carly Thumper Skelly, who Jamie knocked out in 4 rounds. Good showing for Jamie. She looked strong. She looked capable. I think that was on the undercard of Mikey Garcia versus Sandor Martin. I guess she's supposed to be returning to action at least one more time before this year is out. For some reason, the Thorslund people are under the impression that they're supposed to be fighting. Dina Thorslund, who's kept a very similar schedule to Jamie. Dina, like Jamie, fought 2 times last year, and she's already seen action at least once this year. In April of this year, she won a unanimous decision over Niorquis Carreno. I very much like the idea of a unification match between them, and I don't get the sense that Dina would be at all averse or afraid to take on Jamie. Dina Thorslund herself is already more experienced as a fighter and a champion than Jamie is, having fought more experienced fighters than Jamie has. The best name on Jamie Mitchell's resume, God bless her, is Shannon Courtenay, and Shannon isn't even as experienced as some of the girls that Dina Thorslund has fought. Let alone Dina herself, who's 28 years old. She's approximately 11 years younger than Jamie Mitchell, so what the hell she got to be afraid of? She's not only more experienced than Jamie, she's actually got youth on her side, and she can punch. You know what I always say, there's more to boxing than what you see on paper. If you've actually seen Dina Thorslund in action, you'll know that she's a threat, a credible one, to anybody with a title, anybody with a belt, even the very experienced Yuli Hangaluna, WBC champion of Mexico. So I really don't get the sense that Dina Thorslund is at all averse or squarely proposition of facing Jamie Mitchell here in America. Now, I don't think she's afraid of Jamie. For what it's worth, I don't think Jamie's afraid of her, but there's definitely a miscommunication here. The only one of these 2 fighters that seems to have had a prior engagement of any kind was Jamie. The plan seems to have been to have gotten her out there at least one more time before this year was out to move her into a Shannon-Courtney rematch. A Shannon-Courtney rematch that might pay better than a Deena Thorslund unification fight. So when I think about that, the Deena Thorslund fight jeopardizes the Courtney fight, because if you lose to Deena, there ain't gonna be a Shannon-Courtney fight, a Shannon-Courtney rematch. Maybe Jamie Mitchell herself, the fighter, the champion, maybe she's not at all afraid of Deena Thorslund, but her handlers might be. Maybe they don't like the idea of that fight. I don't know. I don't know for sure what the hell is going on here. Because why would Lee Eaton and Deena Thorslund be under the impression that they were going to fight Jamie in the fall? Why is Lee Eaton saying that they agreed to the fight? They already agreed to unify with Jamie. Why would they be saying this if there wasn't already a prior dialogue, a conversation to do the fight? You think they're just pulling rabbits out of a hat?
You think they're pulling all of this out of their ass?
We'll see what happens. I'd love to see a fight materialize between them, because the bantamweight division, a densely populated division in terms of challengers and champions, it could use consolidation. There are 4 separate world titles split between 4 separate champions. It's about time that the bantamweight division started producing unification matches. In men's super middleweight news, Benavidez Sr. blasts Canelo for Mexican comment. I don't have respect for this guy. Champions fight anybody. I don't imagine that Canelo's losing any sleep over what Senior has to say. I've never in my life heard a champion say that, Benavidez Sr. told Fight Hub TV. If he wants to be like Julio Cesar Chavez, to me, Julio Cesar Chavez is the best that Mexico has ever given. He'll never be like Julio Cesar Chavez, because Julio Cesar Chavez fought black, Mexican, Puerto Ricans, anybody. And this guy is saying that he would not fight any Mexicans. And now he's saying that if Zurdo Ramirez beats Bivol, he's not going to fight him. He's not going to fight Mexicans. To me, I don't have any respect for this guy, bro. Champions fight anybody. The nationality doesn't matter. You know, I actually grew up in the Chavez era. I was very fond of Julio. And when I look at the both of these fighters, David Benavidez, Canelo Alvarez,
Both of them.
I think we all understand that there's never going to be another Julio Cesar Chavez. I think we all understand that he was one of a kind. But when I think about Julio and I think about these two boys, and whose career is more like Julio's, David's or Canelo's? Canelo's career is actually more like Julio's than David's is. Canelo Alvarez is a Mexican national the same way that Julio Cesar Chavez was a Mexican national, whereas David Benavidez was born on this side of the border. You want me to be honest? That's me being honest. There will never be another Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., you understand. But if I had to compare which one of these two boys' career is going more like Julio's, well, it's Canelo's more than David's. Canelo's a multi-weight champion. What's David? Canelo has a large Mexican following. He's got critics the same way any popular fighter has critics, but he does have a large Mexican following the same way Julio had a large Mexican following. David doesn't, and that's why his father can't shut the fuck up about Canelo. Benavidez Sr. believes. Alvarez is simply scared of fighting his son. David Benavidez has long repeatedly called out Canelo Alvarez, but his team appears to have lost hope in that fight materializing anytime soon. It was reported by BoxingScene.com earlier this year that Benavidez's backers at Premier Boxing Champions had offered Alvarez a lucrative 2-fight deal, which included a fight with Benavidez. In the end, Alvarez rebuffed that offer in favor of another lucrative deal with Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing and DAZN. If you think you can beat David, why don't you come and shut me up, Benavidez Sr. said. Fight him, my son. But what it is, he's scared of fighting David Benavidez. If David was so easy, he wouldn't care if he was Mexican or black or whatever, but he knows David is bigger and stronger. Are those David's only advantages? That he's got size on Canelo Alvarez? Because Gennady had a bit of size on Canelo. So did Daniel Jacobs. A lot of people have size on Canelo Alvarez because he's not a big guy. He's actually a rather small, stumpy fighter. And, you know, Gennady had a bit of size on him, so did Daniel Jacobs, so did Callum Smith, so did Billy Joe Saunders, and so did Caleb Plant, so did Dimitri Bivol more recently. Most of the time, Canelo Alvarez is fighting bigger guys. Now, how many guys has David fought that are bigger than him? You talk about this Canelo guy like he's got size advantages over these guys that he fights, when he fights bigger fighters than he is all the time. How many times has your son done that? How many? Senior continued, I have a lot of respect for him, Alvarez, right now. I wouldn't call him pound for pound because he lost to Bivol, but he's a dangerous fighter. But we're not afraid of taking challenges like that and risk our undefeated records with someone like him. But he just doesn't want to take that opportunity or the risk of losing to David Benavidez and taking all of his fame. He lost to Bivol, not a problem. If he loses to David, David becomes a superstar, and he's forgotten. That's what I think. That's what it is.
Senior says they're not afraid of taking challenges, but what challenges have they taken?
You see, I was never against David Benavidez getting this fight. I wasn't against Andre getting it or even Jermall Charlo getting it. Wasn't against Dimitri Bivol getting it. But I knew that Canelo Alvarez was the one with the luxury of choice here because he paid the cost to be the boss. David hasn't and doesn't want to. He first procured a WBC title in the super middleweight division as far back as 2017, and he hasn't had a signature fight since then.
Since ever. He's never had a signature fight, and that's the problem.
Been at super middleweight for how long now? Throughout 2 cycles of different super middleweight champions, he hasn't unified with one among them. And unifying would have been pivotal in this situation because it would have made David that much harder to ignore. He would have actually had something that Canelo Alvarez wanted, something that he needed.
Is it Canelo Alvarez's fault that your son lost his title the first time due to sniffing cocaine, treating his nose?
Is it his fault that your son's promoter, Samson Lukowicz, delayed the Caleb Plant fight and wanted to continue marinating it? Wanted to continue building it at a time when David could have fought that guy, took his red belt, and he would have been a unified champion.
There's no excuses. Jermall Charlo in the junior middleweight division in 2020.
The year the pandemic hit, he had his unification match with Jason Rosario inside of the bubble, as did Teofimo Lopez and Vasil Lomachenko.
That was in 2020. Both those unification matches happened in the same year. You want to know what David did that year?
He lost his title on the scales ahead of a Romer Angulo fight. A Romer Angulo fight that could have been a Caleb Plant unification match. And Samson Lukowicz made the willful decision to delay the unification match in order to get in a few title defenses. Perhaps if David would have been preparing for a champion instead of a challenger, he would have taken the preparation a bit more seriously. Perhaps he wouldn't have blown the weight. Perhaps he would have been more focused on the situation.
So when you don't have anything that anybody wants or anybody needs, what do you expect?
A lot of guys take a lot of context out of the conversation whenever Canelo Alvarez is brought up, because it's the only way they can formulate anything semblant of an argument. And even then, it's not cohesive. It doesn't make sense.
You can't talk like this with your son's resume being as paper thin as it is.
You claim that Canelo Alvarez doesn't want to take on challenging fights and bigger guys, but he just came from taking on a bigger guy in a challenging fight in Dimitri Bivol. It didn't work out. So when are you going to do that? Because you are bigger than Canelo. That's the context that often gets left out. That David Benavidez is huge.
You're busting at the seams trying to make super middleweight.
Should have get off the pot.
Canelo's next fight is on DAZN, and in all likelihood, the next fight after that is going to be on DAZN.
It's not a guarantee. Nothing really is, but it might be. And you can't afford to keep dealing in variables when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, hoping that he'll give you a call, hoping that he'll pick up the phone. What have you been doing all this time?
And what are you about to do? Because the David Morrell fight fell through, so who are you going to fight?
Not just at the end of this year, but going into next year, while you wait for Canelo Alvarez, while you continue to wait.
What are you going to do?
More interviews? More call-outs? Is that it? And finally, just in keeping with the theme of news at or around these weights, Zurdo Ramirez says, expectation is to win all the titles. Bivol first, then Benavidez to become undisputed.
Oh, so you're not going to chase around Canelo Alvarez if you beat the guy that beat him?
We'll see. Gilberto Ramirez is confident of becoming undisputed light heavyweight champion within his next 2 or 3 fights. The Mexican southpaw, aptly better known as Zurdo, is scheduled to face reigning WBA light heavyweight titleist Dimitri Bivol on November 5th. With a win, the plan would be to immediately explore an undisputed showdown with Artur Beterbiev, the true lineal champion and unified WBC, IBF, and WBO titleist. That is my expectation, to win all the titles, Ramirez told Boxing Scene. This is first. Then we will fight Artur Beterbiev to become undisputed.
How does a fight like that happen when Artur fights on the top-ranked ESPN side of things?
Really don't know. I vaguely recall Bob Arum telling the people over there at Fight Hype that he doesn't want to send his fighters to DAZN, and that's where Zurdo Ramirez boxes. If he emerges the victor...
It's the same problem, isn't it? He boxes on DAZN the same as Dimitri.
Artur Beterbiev added to his unified title reign, unseating WBO titleist Joe Smith in a second-round knockout on June 18th at Madison Square Garden's Hulu Theater in New York City. I think it was great. Artur Beterbiev did a great job in his fight, Ramirez said of Beterbiev's performance. He got rid of Joe Smith in 2 rounds. Let's go home. He got in there and got out of there. I was happy for him.
Yeah, he was supposed to be fighting his mandatory challenger, Anthony Yarde, later on this year, but he pulled out with an injury.
An injury that his trainer, Mark Ramsey, downplayed, saying it was little more than just a bit of cartilage they had to remove from his knee, and he could be ready to fight.
He could be match fit by the end of this year.
But as far as rescheduling the Anthony Yarde fight, they're looking at early next year, so it's all the same thing, isn't it? Artur Beterbiev will have only fought just once, this entire year. As far as what Zurdo thinks about Dimitri, I think Dimitri Bivol is the best out of the two, suggested Ramirez, who has scored 5 straight knockouts since moving up to light heavyweight in 2019. I think he has the better footwork. He's a really good boxer. He sets up his punches really well.
And if Zurdo beats him, he's saying he's going to pursue undisputed. I won't fault him for that.
No, I'm not going to fault him for it, but I do have to ask, how does it happen when Bob didn't want to send Artur to DAZN for Dimitri?
He didn't want to send him over there, so is Oscar going to want to send Zurdo over to ESPN?
Listen, Oscar didn't want to send Jaime Munguia over to Showtime for a fight that I actually felt he could have won, the Jermall Charlo fight. He didn't want to send Jaime over to Showtime short of a joint pay-per-view, and that fight between them, well, it's just not a big enough pot for 2 separate platforms and 2 separate promoters to be involved. So the fight didn't materialize. Something very similar applies to a Zurdo Ramirez versus Artur Beterbiev fight. Great fight that it might be. It's not a big enough fight that 2 separate platforms and 2 separate promoters can share it. Somebody's got to cross the street.
Somebody would have to, and it's a very risky fight for both boys.
Particular to Zurdo, Oscar's going to gamble Zurdo potentially losing to the biggest puncher in this division when he just beat the guy that beat Canelo?
You're telling me that Oscar's going to move heaven and earth to make the Beterbiev fight happen when he's got the guy
that beat the guy. The man who beat the man who beat the man.
Oscar holds grudges.
You don't think Zurdo Ramirez beating Dimitri Bivol, you don't think Oscar would use that as an opportunity to lambast Canelo Alvarez, slander him, and make him look bad?
You don't think he'd use that to pressure Canelo Alvarez to fight Zurdo?
While Zurdo stuffs his face with voluntary challengers, the more alphabet titles you collect, the more mandatories that come with them, and I'm not sure that that's what Oscar wants for his fighter. More importantly, Oscar doesn't have that many bodies to spare at Golden Boy, that many flagship fighters, let alone champions. If Zurdo beats Dimitri, it's hard to imagine he'd just ship him off to Top Rank and ESPN to be content for them.
Hey, listen, I want undisputed as much as the next guy, but if Zurdo wins, I do have to ask.
How does it happen? Whether Dimitri Bivol wins or Zurdo Ramirez wins? All the same, because it's the same question. How does it happen when the other belts are on the other side of the street?
Given the circumstances, yeah, I think that's a legitimate question.
How does it happen?